Welcome to the Neurokrish Immersion. In this edition of the podcast, we will discuss near death experiences, and this, of course, is a logical follow on to the podcast about death and dying and end of life care. I was inspired to do this by reading about Peter Fenwick, whom I had the opportunity to meet as a young doctor in training while at Queen Square in London. He was a very well-known electrophysiologist and neuropsychiatrist, and unknown to me, he had become subsequently, in the later years of his career, a world expert on near-death experiences. And his obituary was prominently carried in a number of periodicals, including The Economist. It begins like this. The man who sat facing Peter Fenwick in his consulting room was lucky to be alive. A while ago, he had come into St. Thomas's Hospital in London to have a catheter inserted in his heart. But things had gone wrong, and he went into cardiac arrest. There was no respiratory effort and no brainstem reflex. For some minutes, to all the doctors around him, he was clinically dead. But not to him. From somewhere outside his body, he watched what they were doing to him as he lay inert on the gurney. Then he went through a tunnel towards a light that was strangely welcoming. At the tunnel's end, bathed in that light, was a garden of beautiful flowers. He wandered there for a while, surrounded by love. He met dead relatives and silently conversed with them. Briefly, he saw his life in review, though no one judged him except himself. Then he suddenly realized that if he went on, he would die, so he returned to his body and its pain. This experience touched on the subject that had fascinated Dr. Fenwick ever since his graduation from Cambridge. What was consciousness, and how did it relate to brain function? Was it a transcendent reality, as he increasingly felt, or was it secreted by the brain like bile from the liver? What sort of research could bridge the gap? When he went back into medicine, his first interest was brain surgery, but he decided he didn't want to look into the brain through some deep dark hole. He needed to study its workings in conscious patients. The neurophysiology unit he ran for 20 years in the Maudsley Hospital dealt with epilepsy, sleep, meditation, and dreams. NDEs, near-death experiences, were a natural next step for him. Almost no work had been done on them. The field was clear, but it was also dismissed. The world, according to science in the 1960s, was mechanistic and purely material. At Cambridge, he hardly ever heard the word consciousness, and NDEs therefore were dismissed as hallucinations or as the result of drugs, anesthesia, or oxygen deprivation. At worst, they were thought to be some common myth for people afraid of death. At Cambridge, the master of his college, Trinity, had won a Nobel Prize partly for showing how neurons communicated with each other by pulses of electricity. Once neurons were completely understood, one critic told him the debate on NDEs would be over. What he chose was the hard road. His attempt to set up a study of near-death experiences at the Maudsley was laughed away by its ethics committee. The head of the intensive care unit said such things never happened there. A vicar, horrified, said no one in his congregation had ever experienced such a thing. But all were proved wrong, for in 1988, a BBC documentary featuring Dr. Fenwick brought in more than 2,000 letters from the great British public, who not only cheered him with stories of their own near-death experiences, but when he sent 500 of them detailed questionnaires, also gave him a wonderful database for a study of the phenomenon itself. This is from the Dr. Fenwick's obituary. So let's ask ourselves, what is a near-death experience? These are deep psychic, conscious, semi-conscious, or recollected experiences of someone who is approaching or has temporarily begun the process of dying, which usually occur in life-threatening conditions. In these experiences, the individual seems to be awake and observes his or her body from the world from a point outside the physical body. There are many common features that are reported as part of these: a feeling of inner peace, out-of-body experiences as if one has left one's body, traveling in a dark environment or a void, usually associated with being in a tunnel, reviewing one's life from childhood onwards, seeing a bright light, entering an extraterrestrial or other realm, and communicating with sentient beings. These experiences, NDEs as we will keep calling them through the podcast, occur in various situations. Cardiac arrest in myocardial infarction leading to what one would have described as clinical death, shocks caused by blood loss after delivery or in post-operative complications, septic shock, anaphylactic shock, electrocution, coma caused by traumatic brain injury, brain strokes, intracerebral hemorrhages or infarctions, suicide attempts, near drowning or suffocation experiences, any form of apnea, cessation of breath, and any other cases where death is unavoidable. Thanks to survival rates improving, the co-occurrence of NDEs is increasing, and recollection of these phenomena or really personal investigation of this phenomena may happen 5 or 10 years after the occurrence of the experience. And this, of course, makes it difficult to accurately evaluate the physiological and pharmacological factors that contributed. Van Lommel and Hess have differentiated the theories that link NDE to both physiological changes and to psychological reactions. The previous studies have highlighted the uniqueness of NDE memories in the autobiographical memory, stating that NDE memories contain more sensory, emotional, and self-referential details in comparison with memories of other real and imaginary events, or the memories of a coma or impaired consciousness without NDE survivor. So survivors seem to have very distinct and evocative memories when they have gone through a near-death experience. The experiences can vary depending on the survivor's own cultural and religious background and are almost always described based on the individual's religious beliefs. Most of the early studies of NDEs have only depicted positive emotions. In a detailed systematic analysis published in Frontiers in Psychology, the authors Hashimi et al. Have described several types of thematic experiences. They talk about cognitive experiences where there is a change in the nature of time, belief in the power of God, a long time, the slowness of the speed of time, reasoning in actions and behaviors are all highlighted, and there are very distinct ways of describing it. One person says, "It seems that time is in the hands of God's power. Apparently it took me 4 minutes to die, but it took much, much longer for me there. The speed of time was slower than usual." The other type of experience they describe are emotional experiences, which are largely positive. There is an absence of fear, there's feeling of being very comfortable and relaxed, and one person says, "In the experiences I had, I was never accompanied by feelings like fear, terror, and nightmare. I always felt a deep sense of peace and relief." Peace, comfort, rest, and the opportunity to be calm, like a nice and pleasant holiday, are described. Spiritual and religious experiences are another theme, meeting with the dead being a very oft-reported phenomenon. People seem to meet unknown people unknown people are introduced to the experimenter and by the person going through the experience, and they recount the physical characteristics of the dead person to others after coming back to life. One person says, I had an aunt who died 20 years before I was born. I had no pictures or memories of her. In my experience, I had a brief meeting with her and I was told that she is your aunt. She loved me a lot. After I returned to the world, when I described her appearance to my mother, she confirmed that she was my aunt. The other kind of experience that is described is a supernatural experience, which is often an out-of-body experience. There is a feeling of the soul not leaving the body, seeing the material body in an environment outside the physical body, and being near the ceiling. One person says, when I was taken out of the ambulance and being transferred to the operating room, I suddenly found myself lying on a stretcher in the corridor of the hospital. However, because of religious beliefs, I did not feel like I had died because we believe in taking life and the difficulty of death, and I did not experience anything like that. I was on top of my own body, but I didn't think my soul was completely separated from my body. I remember that doctors and nurses were talking to each other. I even remember the color of their clothes. I really saw I was near the ceiling and looking down. Thus, people seem to have different thematic experiences: cognitive, emotional, spiritual, religious, and supernatural as part of an NDE. And the frequency of these experiences is well described in this paper. And for those of you who are watching the visual guide to this podcast, you'll be able to see which are the experiences and how frequently they seem to occur. Now, there was an excellent review authored by Dr. Jeffrey Lang, and he's a person who set up a website for near-death experiences, and he has been collecting a lot of data on NDEs for many years. The Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, the NDERF, was established in 1998 to conduct NDE research and to be a public service. It is an NDERF policy that all NDE accounts shared with NDERF are posted on the website if the NDERs give permission to do so. Nearly everyone allows their experience to be posted on the website, and portions of the website, including the questionnaire, have been posted in over 20 different languages. The website has been at or near the top of websites listed from a Google search for the term near-death experience. And this prominence of the NDERF website provided Dr. Lang with a unique opportunity to conduct a large-scale study, including NDEs from around the world. In 2014, he says there were 3,700 NDEs posted on the NDERF website, which is by far the largest collection of publicly accessible NDE accounts in the world. When I was preparing for this podcast, I looked up the website, and it now has 5,300 experiences from all over the world in many languages. One of the very predominant features that comes out are lucid, organized experiences while unconscious, comatose, or clinically dead. The survey asked, how did your highest level of consciousness and alertness during the experience compare to your normal everyday consciousness and alertness? Of the 1,122 people surveyed, 74% indicated that they had more consciousness and alertness than normal. 20% experienced normal consciousness and alertness, and only 5% had less consciousness and alertness than normal. It also asked, if your highest level of consciousness and alertness during the experience was different from your everyday consciousness and alertness, please explain. The NDER surveyed commonly reported that consciousness during their experiences was clear, more aware, and often associated with heightened awareness. Another feature that comes out of these surveys is seeing ongoing events from a location apart from the physical body while unconscious, what is called an out-of-body experience. About 45% of near-death experiencers report these out-of-body experiences, which involves them seeing and often hearing ongoing earthly events from a perspective that is apart and usually above their physical bodies. And following cardiac arrest, NDEs may see and later accurately describe their own resuscitation. Indeed, I've had a doctor who went into cardiac arrest while being treated describe his own resuscitation to me in exactly this similar way of a near-death experience. The first prospective study of the accuracy of outer-body observations during these experiences was by Dr. Michael Sabom, and the study investigated a group of patients who had cardiac arrests with NDEs that included out-of-body experiences and compared them with patients who experienced a cardiac crisis but did not have near-death experiences. Both groups of patients were asked to describe their own resuscitation as best as they could. Sabom found that the group of NDE patients were much more accurate than the other group in describing their own resuscitations. So interestingly, having a near-death experience seems to make you much more aware of what is going on around you. Near-death experiences also have happened in people who are blind and during which they regained their vision or had supernormal vision. So the website talks about 14 individuals who were blind from birth in one study, and 9 of them described vision during their experiences. Marta, a 5-year-old blind girl who walked into a lake, says, "I slowly breathed in the water and became unconscious. A beautiful lady dressed in bright white light pulled me out. The lady looked into my eyes and asked me what I wanted. I was unable to think of anything until it occurred to me to travel around the lake. As I did so, I saw detail that I would not have seen in real life. I could go anywhere, even to the tops of trees, simply by my intending to go there. I was legally blind. For the first time, I was able to see leaves on trees, birds' feathers, birds' eyes, details on telephone poles, and what was in people's backyards. I was seeing far better than 20/20 vision." Another survey asked experiencers, 1,122, "Did your vision differ in any way from your normal everyday vision in any aspect such as clarity, field of vision, colors, brightness, depth perception, degree of solidness, transparency of objects, etc.?" In response, 64%, 722, answered yes, and 16.2% said uncertain, and 19.4% said no. So the vast majority did feel that the vision had greater clarity. And common statements included, colors were beyond any that I had ever seen. Everything seemed so much more colorful and brighter than normal. My vision was generally increased. I was able to see things as close or as far as I needed. There was no strain involved. It was almost like auto-zooming a camera. I had 360-degree vision. I could see below, above, on my right, on my left, behind. I could see everywhere at the same time. When it comes to NDEs that occur while under general anesthesia, it's well known that following a cardiac arrest, the EEG becomes flat in 10 to 20 seconds, and there is usually amnesia prior to and following the arrest. The occurrence of a cardiac arrest while under general anesthesia is a combination of circumstances in which no memory from that time should be possible. But there are illustrative examples to the contrary that come from these surveys. During my surgery, I felt myself lift from my body and go above the operating table. The doctor told me later that they had kept my heart open and stopped for a long time, and they had great amount of difficulty getting my heart started again. That must have been when I left my body, because I could see the doctors nervously trying to get my heart going. It was strange to be so detached from my physical body. I was curious about what they were doing, but not concerned. Then, as I drifted further away, I saw my father at the head of the table. He looked up at me, which did give me a surprise because he had been dead for almost a year. The other NDE experience is being in a tunnel. Dr. Lang says he reviewed 613 near-death experiences and found 23 near-death experiences that appear to have occurred during general anesthesia. In all these circumstances, cardiac arrest was the most common life-threatening event and was described in association with these near-death experiences. And when these 23 near-death experiencers who underwent a cardiac arrest were compared to 590 non-anesthesia near-death experiences, so they had the near-death experience but it wasn't due to anesthesia, he found that having a tunnel-like experience was the only statistically significant difference. So somehow having an arrest during anesthesia seemed to lead to a tunnel-like experience, that of being in a tunnel. Dr. Bruce Grayson, a leading NDE researcher at the University of Virginia, states, in our collection of NDEs, 127 out of 578 NDE cases, 22%, occurred under general anesthesia, and they included such features as OBEs, out-of-body experiences, that involved experiencers watching medical personnel working on their bodies, an unusually bright or vivid light, meeting deceased person, and thoughts, memories, and sensations that were clearer than usual. NDEs due to cardiac arrest while under general anesthesia therefore seem to occur and are medically inexplicable. What Dr. Lang concludes by saying is that multiple lines of evidence point to the conclusion that near-death experiences are medically inexplicable and cannot be explained by known physical brain function. Some near-death experiences have included a part or all of their prior life reviews, and this NDE element is called a life review. NDEers typically describe their life review from a third-person perspective. The life review may include awareness of what others were feeling and thinking at the time earlier in their life when they interacted with them. This previously unknown awareness of what other people were thinking or feeling when they interacted with them is often surprising and unexpected to the NDE experiencer. Here are some examples. I went into a dark place with nothing around me, but I wasn't scared. It was really peaceful there. I then began to see my whole life unfolding before me like a film projected on a screen, from babyhood to adult life. It was so real. Another one, I was looking at myself but better than a 3D movie, as I was also capable of sensing the feelings of the persons I had interacted with through the years. I could feel the good and bad emotions I made them go through. Dr. Lang says, in my review of 617 near-death experiences, a life review occurred in 88 near-death experiences, about 14%. None of these life reviews appear to have any unrealistic content. Life reviews can include long forgotten details of their earlier life, and NDEers later confirm that really happened. If NDEs were unreal experiences, it would be expected that there would be significant error in life reviews and possibly hallucinatory features. However, the consistent accuracy of the life reviews in NDE experiences, including the awareness of long forgotten events and awareness of thoughts and feelings of others from past interactions, further suggests the reality of NDEs. When people known to near-death experiences are encountered in NDEs, the great majority are people who are deceased. Indeed, only 4% of NDE experiences are people currently alive reported. Here's an example. I approached the boundary. No explanation was necessary for me to understand at the age of 10 that I once crossed the boundary, I could never come back. Period. I was more than thrilled to cross. I intended to cross, but my ancestors over the boundary caught my attention. They were talking in telepathy, which caught my attention. I was born profoundly deaf and had all hearing family members, all of whom knew sign language. I could read or communicate with about 20 ancestors of mine and others through telepathic methods. It overwhelmed me. I could not believe how many people I could telepathize with simultaneously. Young children too have had near-death experiences, and the content is strikingly similar to older children and adults. It is often been supposed that the NDEs of very young children will have content limited to their vocabulary. However, it is now clear that the age of children at the time of their NDE does not in any way determine its complexity. Even pre-linguistic children have later reported quite complex experiences. Age does not seem in any way to affect the content of the near-death experience. There have been questions about cross-cultural factors, and in the NDERF database, at the time that it was reviewed, 19 non-Western NDEs, where a non-Western country was defined as areas of the world that are predominantly not of Jewish or Christian heritage, had been documented. It appears that all near-death experience elements that occur in Western NDEs are present in non-Western NDEs, and therefore there are striking similarities. And indeed, there is a suggestion in the website review that NDEs among people who follow the Islamic religion may actually be quite common as they are in the West, and may not be especially different, with the key features being very similar, although there could be sometimes cultural variations and prior religious or spiritual beliefs, but these don't seem to have an overwhelming influence. What happens to a person after a near-death experience? 278 people were questioned about this. 152, 54.7%, said large changes in my life after the experience. 68, that is 24.5%, said moderate changes in my life. 28, that is 10.1%, said slight changes in my life. Only 14.5% said there were no changes in their life. And 16, 5.8%, whether there were changes was unknown. And this comes out of a study conducted by Pin Van Lommel. Nature Reviews Neurology has come up with a neuroscientific model of near-death experience, and if you're following the visual guide, you can pick up the reference to that paper. Here are some conclusions from that study. The emergence of a rich phenomenology in near-death experiences during acute physiological crisis might be attributed to a cascade of concomitant neurophysiological and psychological processes, including phylogenetically preserved threat responses. From a neurophysiological perspective, NDEs can result from impaired cerebral blood flow, causing systemic hypotension, low blood pressure, hypoxia, low oxygen, and hypercapnia, buildup of carbon dioxide, resulting in acidosis, and from an increased neuronal excitability caused by dysregulation of key neurotransmitter systems. From a psychological perspective, NDEs may be partially shaped by top-down processes and facilitated by non-pathological cognitive traits such as dissociation propensity. In other words, your ability to dissociate or to remove yourself consciously from an experience may predicate your development of an NDE. The evolutionary roots of NDEs are thought to be linked to survival and coping mechanisms, with serotonin probably mediating calming effects through 5-HT1A receptors and contributing to hallucinogenic aspects through 5-HT2A receptor hyperactivation. Understanding the slow recovery of brain activity after resuscitation might provide a valuable opportunity to explore the neural correlates of near-death experiences, concludes this study by Marcia et al. In Dr. Fennick's study of 2000 letters following the BBC documentary, about 98% of the respondents had not known what a near-death experience was. Almost all, however, told much the same tale. They had left the body or gone down a tunnel towards a bright light, which embraced them with love and peace. About 40% met dead relatives or friends there, but as presences rather than forms, and these often told them that it was not yet their time. Some had a life review from which they were gently encouraged to learn. Then, when they reached a boundary they strongly felt they should not cross, they turned back. It was always their decision. Something urgent had to be said or done before they actually died. One woman said she had to finish a pile of ironing. The similarity of these experiences and the overwhelming realness for those who had them fortified his own growing belief in a consciousness that was universal, external, and contained many levels of reality, a consciousness that was only dimly filtered by the senses and ever-busy, marvelous brain. Dr. Fennick went on to write a wonderful book, The Art of Dying. The hardest part of death, as he reported in The Art of Dying, was to give everything up. The ego, so carefully constructed since childhood, so loud with chatter and insistent on control, had to be stripped away completely to achieve transcendence. While in this world he had made a start. He studied Zen, which he found hard, and did daily meditation. He also followed the teachings of Alain Forget, a philosopher whose system for losing the ego was distancing and discernment. He discovered half-hidden walls in himself that he had to break down, especially his resentment of his mother for sending him from Kenya at the age of 5 to boarding school in England. With a bit of struggle, he learned to live in the moment, discarding both the future and the past. The obituary concludes thus: in his many talks, he never hectored like a teacher. He spoke calmly and happily, sometimes with his Burmese cat on his lap. His field of interest, controversial as it remained, filled him with joy and curiosity. Whatever was to come next, beyond the body, he knew it would be wonderful. He could hardly wait. I was inspired by this biography to go back and look up near-death experiences in some detail. And it's been quite a fascinating journey. I'm sure you'll agree with me that the many commonalities of experience that many people have reported and the deeply spiritual nature of these experiences make them extremely special, something beyond ordinary human and ordinary scientific comprehension. There is another world that perhaps we all need to acknowledge and think about, and perhaps one day that will be another podcast. But I leave you with the thought: what do we learn from these near-death experiences, and what will happen to all of us when we die? Thank you.